This video clip is going to talk about inverse relations and being able to create an inverse relation using a table or a graph. Now, after studying page 405 in the text, you should realize now that every relation has an inverse. And the way we create the inverse of a relation is we take the domain of the original relation and we make it the range of the inverse. And then we take the range of the original relation and we make it the domain of the inverse. So if this is a relation right here, the table I'm circling with my cursor right now, to create the inverse of that relation, I would take the domain, the x values, and I would plug them into the range for the inverse. So in other words, I'm just making the x's into y's. So I'm going to do that. Well, first I'm going to plot my original relation. Okay? So these four black dots on a graph are this relation. Here's x equals 0, negative 1, 2, 0, 3, and 2, and then 4 and 3. Now again, to make the inverse of this relation, I'm going to take my domain and I'm going to make it the range of the inverse. So I'm going to take the x's and I'm going to put them here into the y column on this new table that's going to be my inverse. And then I'm going to take the range of the original one and I'm going to make it the x. So if I was just using tables to show my relation, this would be the relation that I started with, and this would be the inverse relation. If I'm going to use a graph to show them, then I would take and I would plot the inverse, and so you see the new dots come out right here. These dots are the plots of these. Now, one hint I'll give you, when you're doing this on paper for practice or if you're doing it on a test and you're asked to plot the inverse, I would use some other symbol to plot the inverse. So I might use a little x here to plot the inverse and then dots to use the original. Okay, or I might use closed dots for the original and open dots for the inverse. You want to show some way that this inverse is different, and unfortunately in this program I don't have a way to change these dots. Now, one thing you'll notice is that if I were to draw a line right through here, and I can't do it in this program, but if I were to draw a line right through here, which is the line y equals x, if I were to plot y equals x all the way through this graph, these two images, or these two relations, would be mirror images of each other. Okay, if you can imagine this line right here, this is a mirror image of that one. And so that's one characteristic of the inverse, is that the inverse, when you plot the graph, you will create a reflection or a mirror image of the original relation around the line y equals x. Now we're going to play with that some more a little bit later as we learn about functions. But for now, what I want you to understand is that when you start with a relation, if you have a table, the way you create the inverse of the relation is you construct a new table and you take the domain of the first relation and make it the range of the second. In other words, you take the x's and you make them y's. And then you take the range of the original relation and you make it the domain of the inverse. In other words, the y's become the x's in the inverse.